What's up, Navigating Academia family? I hope you guys are having a great day so far. This is your buddy Dr. Singh coming at you to be able to do my first review video. Several of you have written to me and have suggested that this is something you would like me to do, so I figured I'd give it a shot. Also, it helps me to be able to get the word out about other academia-focused YouTube channels that you guys may get a lot out of as well. So what I've tried to do, because my background is in clinical psychology, and a lot of you who subscribe to the channel are really interested in this topic of getting into different types of behavioral healthcare programs, be they be PhD or clinical, PhDs in clinical psychology, or PsyDs in clinical psychology, or MAs in counseling, or doctorates in counseling, or MSWs, so you can become a licensed clinical social worker. There are so many options out there. But a lot of you, recently, I've been getting this big surge of individuals who are really interested in me helping them with their application materials and really optimizing them after you've gotten them prepared for getting into one of these doctoral programs in clinical psych. So I figured I'd take a look at what else was out there online. I've actually identified, as you can see here on the top tabs on this Chrome window, there really are quite a few videos that are kind of out there. Not a ton, but enough for me to be interested in kind of looking into these things more. To be honest with you, some of these videos are extremely, extremely long, and so what I've tried to do is to be able to take ones that are kind of like 10 to 15 minutes max, and we won't go through all of them, and kind of what I'll do is make one video for each of them, and we'll see whether or not a series like this actually performs well. One thing that you guys will notice on the channel is that I'm trying out a bunch of different things to be able to see if anything sticks. So for example, earlier in the year I requested that people send me their CVs or send me their personal statements for all sorts of things, for applying to postdocs in grad school, applying to undergrad even, applying for summer internships, for funding opportunities, for tenure track positions, and I went through and did comprehensive breakdowns of all of those. And those seem to work pretty well as well. I see a lot of people doing these kinds of reaction videos because they're kind of classified under fair use. Sometimes I do see people doing the videos to kind of bash the people who are kind of other content creators. I really don't believe in that. So really what I'm going to be doing is commenting on whether I agree or disagree with what the other professional is saying, but certainly huge respect to everybody in the YouTube, especially the academic YouTube community, and hopefully you guys will see some videos of some content creators that you haven't checked out before, but then maybe you'd really enjoy checking out that content. So without further ado, make sure that you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you enjoy content like this, and make sure that you also check out Chasing Clinical Psychology, which is the channel from which today's video, which I'll be reviewing, comes from. And this video is entitled 3 Secret Must-Dos for PhD applications, specifically in clinical psychology. So I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and give a listen, and I'll give you my feedback kind of as we go. I'll pause it. So here we go.
Hi, my name is Teresa. I'm a newly clinical psychology doctoral student.
I can only talk about myself and my own experience.
And I just wanted to make this video because I know when I was applying and...
First thing, I'm sure it is probably on your guys' end as well, it's a very quiet video, even though I've maxed out all my sound options. Maybe it's a little bit louder for you guys.
Kind of diving deep into the subreddit threads of grad admissions and grad cafe forums and asking everyone and anyone with a doctorate if they could give me any tips and advice. These were kind of like the main 3, kind of formalities or just things that I didn't really know that I found pretty helpful.
Okay, this is awesome. So she's done a really deep dive into everything online, and you guys know how stuff online is. There's a lot of stacks and forums and Reddit threads and these sorts of things where a lot of people end up giving their advice. And obviously, the thing is even in the worst advice, there's like 1% a nugget of truth, which is a good thing. The problem these days is that there's a preponderance of information, such that people who are applying usually experience this thing called paralysis by analysis. There's just too much information out there, and honestly, it can be really hard to know kind of who to trust. It's especially, I gotta be honest with you, it's a lot easier if somebody's telling you exactly what you want to hear, right? Which essentially will just make you feel secured and comfortable in these things. It's a lot more comfortable for us as human beings to kind of stick with that one individual who's telling you that like all of your credentials are totally enough, as opposed to seeking out opportunities to be uncomfortable so that maybe you can even further optimize your materials, right? So what she's saying is that she went to some places like Grad Cafe. Grad Cafe wasn't around for sure when I was actually applying, which was forever ago. But I've definitely checked it out. It's got some great resources. There are, I know from my experience and from working with so many of you on one-on-one consultation sessions, and you can always book a one-on-one consult with me down here at the website below to go over your materials, to be able to help you choose your career path, to be able to weigh the pros and cons of different types of degrees and so forth. I do them all the time, every single day. It would be a total blessing to work with you as well, especially now that it's application season, right? But I do find that there's a lot of bad information going around there. A lot of people that go to Amazon.com, they look up books that are specific kind of to the particular type of degree that they would like. And yes, oftentimes there's totally legit books, but there's a lot of self-published books. And these self-published books give some really bad pieces of advice, specifically in things like clinical psychology, particularly for PhDs, where they're recommending like, applying to 10 or more programs or 15 or more programs. That is completely and utterly insane. You should be applying to 3 to 5 programs that you have put at least several years into doing all of your background work to be able to make sure you have very strong personal connections with the target supervisor. No, that does not include sending them an email and telling them that you love all their stuff, right? People get really scared though because they think to themselves, whoa, just 3 to 5. No way, I should be applying to like, 10 to 20 of these things. The odds of getting in are so low. But that's the thing, the odds of getting in are so low. Number one, because applications have exploded. Now that most programs don't require the GRE, at least for the time being. But at the same time, because of that, a lot of people are like, let me apply everywhere, because then at least maybe I'll get in somewhere. But because of that, they're diluting all of their energy that they need to really get to know not just every program, but much more importantly, develop fundamental personal connections with each and every one of the target supervisors that they've got. So let's go ahead and keep going here.
And I hope you guys might as well. That's my intro. That's it. The first thing that across the board everyone said consistently is just about fit and how well you fit with the program, the faculty member that you're applying for, and their lab and what their research interests are.
Awesome. God, great advice that she's giving, right? So, remember, it's all about goodness of fit, particularly for PhD programs, which are research degree programs. You still will end up getting, if it's an APA accredited program, clinical licensure. You'll be able to get a clinical internship and then eventually take the EPPP if you're in the US and get licensed as a clinical psychologist. But that said, this is something where she's absolutely right that you need to be focused on the program, what it offers, then also the target supervisor in their lab. I would argue that you start with the target supervisor in their lab and then you work it backwards, right, to be able to figure out what programs you should be applying for. If you ever guys ever do consults with me, you'll know that I have a very specific step-by-step strategy for figuring out who within your field you should actually work with as your target supervisor. Never just say, I really want to go to Harvard, for example. Let's take a look at their PhD program. Okay, well, this supervisor is doing something interesting. That is a terrible way to select a target supervisor. I'm telling you, it's like a recipe for disaster. And particularly this year, for some reason, I find a lot of people, that's what they're doing. So if you're doing that, or if you're thinking of doing that, please get in touch so that we can rectify that.
And that can be anything from what your past experiences are, what your current research interests are, what your future interests are, how well that fits with the program, how well that ties into the faculty member that you're applying to and their research work, both past and current and future projects, because you will be there for a very, very, very long time.
That sounds very ominous, right? But she is right. What I recommend to everybody always is that, if they find a supervisor who has been doing work that you love, right? You want to make sure that their funding to be able to doing that work is not about to, run out, because it could be something where they're like, yo, I am done with that. I've been doing that grant for 5 to 7 years on that topic. Now I want to pivot and do something else. Or they don't want to do something else, but they were only able to get grant funding to be able to do something else, right? So you need to make sure that the person that you're going to be working with is actually going to do the kind of work that you wouldn't mind working for 4 to 6, sometimes 7 years doing, right? That's very, very important.
I'll make a whole separate video probably about how to narrow down your PhD program list, but for now I'm just going to talk about like a general fit that seems beyond just the research interest. There's this idea that if you only want to do clinical work, you should do a PsyD, but if you're more research oriented, you should do a PhD. I have different thoughts on that. Maybe that'll be for a different day.
I love how many video ideas she has. You can literally tell by watching the video that she's coming up with new ideas. It's great.
I think each program is completely different. Some programs value one more than the other. Some are kind of even split. And on a lot of programs that you'll see, they'll have something called like a scientist practitioner model or a Boulder model. And that just means that they value both because a clinical psychologist is scientist practitioner.
Remember, guys, all my feedback on this, which is basically that the faculty members of the preponderance of R1 PhD programs in clinical psychology, the preponderance of them, they're getting paid, right? They're faculty stipend, right? Their salary's getting paid by grants. And so because of that, this is something where they're researchers first, and if they do something clinical, it's secondary, or they're clinical in order to be able to collect data that they can use in research purposes. So it is true. I have videos all about PsyD versus PhD. There's actually a video I'm going to be reviewing also about PhD versus PsyD. But anyway, so we'll get to that in kind of other videos. But when she says that there's some clinical psych PhD programs which really focus on the clinical and not a lot about the research, that is one that I don't really hear a lot about. So just to be able to chime in there in terms of my experience.
They practice, they do research. Each program is different, however, so that scale might be leaning in one way or the other. So it's not uncommon for an applicant who's really interested in clinical work to apply to a very research-heavy program. And some programs will straight up tell you, like Yale will straight up say, if you want to do more clinical work, we are not the ones for you. I think their exact words are like, whatever this.
Yeah, honestly, Yale at least is really upfront with that. And I would say that most other universities should be upfront like that too. Remember, I say in other videos, right, the reason for that is pretty clear. If I'm a researcher, right, and I'm a professor in one of these programs, I'm expecting that if I train you how to do research over a course of at least 4 years, that you're going to also go and do research and get your own grants and external funding and include me as a co-principal investigator or a co-I or a consultant, if nothing else, and give me money as part of that funding mechanism to be able to continue the type of work that I've trained you to be able to do. And this is one of the ways that you've got some of these supervisors who are really quite old. They barely even supervise anymore, but they're getting like 50 publications a year. And this is because they've got so many students over such a long time. Those students have had students, and essentially, it's not a pyramid scheme. That sounds terrible, but you get the idea, right? Essentially, you start at the top, and then you basically start having students, and this takes a long time. But because of that, they don't want people who are going to come in and just get trained for 4 years, and then all that education goes out the window, and then somebody only wants to be a clinician. This is why if you do want to go to a clinical psych PhD program, you really do need to push the fact that when it comes to being a clinician, you want to be a clinician only so that you can actually gain experience to be able to improve the quality of your research and translate it more effectively from research into practice and policy.
Sometimes even your letter of recommendation writers will say, what do you want me to emphasize in your letter of recommendation? Like, what is important to you? Tell me about the program. And they shouldn't really be, right, going in depth about how great you are in clinical work if the program is really research heavy. Or, if you're applying to a PsyD and going on and on about your research experience when they're not really research oriented.
So that one, what I'll say is that my personal advice on it is always to be able to have 3 types of letters if you're applying for a clinical psych program, especially for a PhD. You need somebody to talk about yourself clinically, somebody to talk about yourself research-wise, somebody to talk about yourself academically, right? So it's got to be boom, boom, and boom. Those are the 3 areas that's really important about. If it's a PsyD, I would say that you can probably get away with basically having a clinical reference, an academic reference, and kind of a character reference. But if that character reference can also be somebody who knows you extremely well from a research capacity, even better, right? Because a lot of PsyD programs want the same clout, right, and the same reputation that clinical psych PhD programs, which have been around for like 50 years longer, right? So they have a lot longer of a track record of producing, excellent scholars. this is something at the end of the day where they want to show that, like, no, we're good too, if not just as good. And so because of that, if you can show that you're interested in scholarship as well, a lot of PsyD programs still have you do some sort of a capstone or dissertation project, even though usually, from my experience of working with PsyD programs as well as working as a dissertation reviewer, what you'll usually end up seeing is that the rigor is really apples and oranges, right? In terms of taking a look at the methodological rigor, the sample size, and so forth, in terms of projects conducted for a PsyD relative to a clinical psych PhD.
And the same with your statement of purpose. So it all kind of ties in, and you will be asked many times, what do you want to do after you graduate? What are your interests? Do you want to do this or the other? One thing I like about my program is that there's an equal balance between the two, and students are pretty free to move their own scale, and also supported if they decide, I went in this kind of research heavy with my really strong research interest, but now want to lean more towards clinical work.
Respect. This is something that happens to everybody. It happened to me, y'all. I thought I was like clinical all the way. I ended up being like a research professor for like pretty much my whole career. And so in academia. So it's one of these things where, huge respect to that program for recognizing, that some people are going to start one way and end another way. Just remember that as a graduate student, your job is basically to be a good soldier, right? Target grad school supervisors don't want to basically be dealing with somebody else who comes across, none of you are, right, but who comes across as somebody who's either a know-it-all or somebody who says, I want to be the general of my program, I'm paying for my education, therefore I'm going to get exactly what I want instead of doing whatever work you're doing, right? That comes across really poorly. I've seen that a number of times in my career, luckily with none of my previous students. But oh my gosh, guys, just really don't do that. It comes across super poorly, and word gets around because academia is actually a pretty small field, specifically within niches.
So that was great. If you're not sure, talk to the grad students, ask them, are you more this or that? Is this program more heavy with this or versus that? And then you'll get a pretty good idea pretty quickly. Also, there is always a student manual or a student handbook. That's like the holy grail of the program's information. It'll be like 50 pages long, and it has all the details regarding about their curriculum, their funding, dissertation requirements, disciplinary actions, like everything. So that'll also give you a pretty good idea. And you can just type in the program's name and student handbook. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great advice. I think that anybody, when they get into a new program, make sure you have a digital copy of whatever kind of the official procedures or proceedings are for your given program, just so that you've got it. Luckily, these days, everything is digital, and you're not going to be handed some big old tome, big old textbook, or not textbook, but textbook size binder usually is what folks used to get, and so this way it makes life a lot easier. If it's not online, remember, just go to whoever the administrative assistant is for your department and just ask them, right? Be sure to be super friendly to those individuals. Usually, ironically, people in those sorts of positions, people aren't very nice to them, and so you just being nice to them is going to make you stand out a huge amount, and they can do a huge number of things during your dissertation development process, just during your doctorate period, that can help you get ahead quickly. So just always be nice to these people. There's no reason not to be nice anyway.
Okay. The second thing was really important is about your narrative. And this is kind of the story of how you got to be here, what led you here, why do you want to do this specific program, and what do you want to do afterwards. And it's this very interconnected, very intentional story of who you are and how you got here. With your narrative, with your story, you need to connect the dots of your experiences. But think of it as a road trip. What were the big destinations? What were the pit stops? What did how did those little small gas stops fuel your, next big steps? And even if sometimes, my experience, my path was not a linear one at all. Sometimes it could feel like it's zigzagging. Sometimes it could feel like it's a circle. As long as you show that there's intention, even if it didn't feel intentional at the time, even if you could just be able to show that there's intention, that there's a connection, that there's a path, a very specific path, in a way that you'll be able to say, these specific experiences all led to one another, and because of them, I was able to observe X within this population and really push me to ask questions, to be able to answer the questions that I was developing, and this specific program, specifically is what I need to be able to get, the resources and the skills, but also implement them in this population after I graduate. So very intentional.
Okay, so I see what she's saying, and overall, this is good advice. There's nothing that she's saying here that's incorrect. The thing that's really important, though, is that there's kind of like an algorithmic way, actually, to be able to write clinical psych PhD and clinical psych PsyD personal statements. Keep in mind, I've been doing this for like 17, coming on 18 years here, right? I've read thousands of these personal statements, and I've seen the good, I've seen the bad, and I've seen the ugly. And especially at this time of year, this is mostly what I'm doing, is you guys bringing me your CVs, personal statements, diversity statements, and so forth, and just your concerns about, like, do I have a chance of getting in? And these are great questions, right? And having me give you kind of like a very objective look and then helping you to be able to polish everything. Everybody's stuff needs polish. Don't ask your friends, don't ask your family, don't ask your, career services. Oh my God. The number of bad edits I've seen from career services at like over 20 easily universities, it's so bad. So don't take your stuff to career services and expect that they're going to know specifically about clinical psych programs and how to be able to fix stuff. Please don't do that, right? I advocate for a very specific 5-paragraph structure that I walk you through if we have a session, and that 5-paragraph structure works for essentially any prompt for a personal statement that I've pretty much ever been shown. And all of the elements that she's talking about, she's absolutely right. All of those elements are in there. They need to have a very specific structure, though. The idea that I always have, that I tell people, is that imagine it like you're pouring water down a set of stairs, right? It has this beautiful flow. It's like this non-stop perfect flow, but at the same time, it is very stepwise, right? And that's the thing, is that it has to take you through this story. This whole thing is a narrative. And what we don't want to do, and I don't think she means this, but I think that, some people may have this misinterpretation, maybe of what this scholar is saying, have this misinterpretation of potentially the idea that, there's all of this kind of content in here in terms of my life story. I have to put it all in here. A lot of people misinterpret, and they think that they have to put all of their different kind of, as she puts it, these pit stops in there, these fuel stops in there. You do not, right? Don't just restate your CV, right? The idea here is to be able to add humanity and narrative to your story, right? And you don't usually have one paragraph that says, like, this is where I started, and this is where I ended, and this is why this is the right program, and now let me give you some information about some other things. No, it's all over the place, right? Things can't be all over the place. This is why personal statements are the hardest things to be able to write, okay?
Very specific. And don't just think about your narrative in your head. Like, say it out loud, record yourself saying it, use that little like dictation thing in Microsoft Word. It'll help, I promise. And really sit down and out loud or physically write out what your story is.
Yeah, what I do is I just start a Microsoft Word document, right? And I just do bullets. I have like a theme, and then I'll put some bullets underneath it. I'll organize the bullets. And it helps me to organize my thoughts. I'm not very much of like an out loud thinker, but this is super great advice if you are an out loud thinker.
Sometimes what you think is like, oh, that was really random, or that was, like a side thing that's not related, or like that can't really be connected or related. You'd be surprised. The third thing is showing interest. Trust me, I know, obviously you're pouring, your sweat, your tears, your blood into this application, so surely they must know you're interested, but there's something called yield rate.
Basically, yield rate is if a school or program is worried about a low yield rate, they're essentially worried that if they offer a position to an applicant, that they might reject that, how likely they are to reject that and accept a position.
Correct. So just FYI, this is the reason why there's some programs that they end up accepting applications way before the usual deadline. So for example, usually the usual deadline is like somewhere in December, like December 1st, right? Some folks, this year though, I'm finding it's like November 1st. And people are like, why November 1st? Well, then you can make the offer earlier. If you can make the offer earlier, you're more likely to get people to say yes and to be able to formally, legally commit. And if they're committed, then you get them, right? So this is one of the reasons why people end up accepting this kind of stuff earlier, because people are afraid that if you've got all the best schools, and then you've got mid-range schools, and then you got low-range schools that are still APA accredited, yet everybody apply at once, these lower range schools, their acceptance rates are much higher. But the thing is that if they let in 35% of people, that means they're offering acceptance to 35%, right? But the thing is that the preponderance of those individuals won't accept it if there is a better program in terms of better fit for them, where they want to go instead, right? And so this is one of the reasons why in certain programs acceptance rates are so high.
Position at another program.
Again, I don't know how much yield rate is or is not a thing, or which programs use it versus, which don't, which programs kind of take into consideration when looking at their applicants, which don't. I just know that it was a thing that kept popping up. So again, how do I show interest if applying?
I like her editing, by the way. She does some good, cute editing here.
Isn't enough. Well, you gotta wine them and dine them. You gotta chat them up. And I know all of you socially anxious introverts are like screaming in the background, but just bear with me, okay? Hear me out. The first one, after you've narrowed down your list, again, probably gonna make a video on that later. After you've narrowed down your list of the programs that you're interested in, the faculty member that you want to apply to, and you made sure they are in fact accepting students for this application cycle, then you want to do some research. You can use one of these two pages to look up their papers.
Yeah, I would say Google Scholar or ResearchGate is great. Google Scholar is better than ResearchGate. I would also say that depending on the field that you're in, you also want to use what's called a high specificity search engine. So for psych, it would be PsycInfo. For education, it would be ERIC. For medicine, it would be Medline or PubMed. For nursing, it would be CINAHL. Find the one that's specific to your field. Take a look at that. ResearchGate's great, but it's not as useful as something like a PsycInfo or a Google Scholar, like she mentioned.
Read some of the papers, the recent papers. What are some of the projects that they're?
Yeah, recent papers, first authorship, okay, over the last 2 years, and then also anything where one of their current graduate students is first author.
Working on something that interests you, and then come up with an idea, question, a thought, opinion, whatever, then send them an email saying, "Dear Dr. Billy Bob, my name is Jimmy. Please use your own words. Jam. I'm a prospective student for the PhD program. I was wondering if you are accepting students for this application cycle. I read your work on X, Y, and Z," and then just insert your question, opinion, thought, whatever, to show that, you did your research. And then tie that in briefly to your past research work or something you've done, to be like, that really ties in with my work with a whatever. If you are available, I would love to meet to discuss, either my research interests or the current work that you're doing. I look forward to hearing from you. Sincerely yours, warm regards.
Okay, overall, fantastic. The only two things I'll say is, number one, while you're going through all those steps that she recommended, which are good steps, you just want to make sure that it's not getting too lengthy, right? So we're not looking for A4 page, single space font thing here, right? It's too much, right? And number two is I want you to take into consideration here, right, that just because we send them an email expressing our interest and such, right, I personally do not categorize that as a personal connection, but it is an essential step to be able to take in the process. Ideally, if you're trying to strategically become an internal candidate, as I call it, or get really, really ensconced into this individual, the target supervisor's life in a professional sense, so that they're seeing you at conferences, you're getting introduced to them over and over again by these different scholars who they know, like, and trust, this is going to take at least 12 months. So even if it's something where you're not applying this cycle, if you want to apply next cycle, please do get in touch, book a session. Let's come up with a plan to be able to find how it is that we can be able to create that internal candidate status for your specific target supervisor. This includes if you unfortunately are not successful at getting in this cycle. Okay, we can talk about how to do that then in the year to come.
It's Jimmy Jam, okay? 3 things may happen. They may not respond. They might ignore it. They may not see it. It'll get lost at sea. That's okay. You could send another one. When? I don't know. I was never able to figure that out.
Don't send another one. She says she wasn't able to figure it out. don't send another one. The only important thing, right, is that if they see your name and they're like, I think I've heard of this J. Phoenix Singh kid before, right? They literally will go to their email and they're like, there was a million emails coming through that time anyway. I didn't pay attention to any of them. A lot of people do that. They'll literally just search your name and they'll just see that, oh, here's this J. Phoenix Singh guy. He sent me this email. Okay, I guess he was sufficiently interested, da-da-da-da-da-da. Because that's going to have the exact same impact. So do you write back 3 months being later, being like, hey, listen, I don't know if you got my email or not, but I really like your stuff, and that British Journal of Psychiatry piece you put out was baller. No, don't say that. That's weird, right? Just let it go.
About when is an appropriate time to send a follow-up, hi, it's me again, you didn't answer, email. The second option, they might say, I'm not available, but I look forward to reading your application. Cool, at least you know your name. And the third, they might say, yeah, here are my available times. Pick a day. This will be the first impression that you will be making with someone that you're applying to.
I hope that's not the first impression, guys. FYI. The first impression on these people should not be saying, are you taking students? I have my application program, stuff is coming in like a couple of months. Like I said, you need to be developing these relationships over years, right? For me to be able to get into my top programs, my top program, 500 applicants, 1 acceptance, 7 years, tuition and living costs fully covered, double doctorate, insanity, #1 program in the United States in my target field, most famous people in my field at the time in that department, O.M. Jigglypuff, right? O.M. God. This is just one of these things where it took forever. I started my first semester of freshman year. Everything about my undergrad was all focused or whatever on these specific people, not the specific program, the specific people. If it was something where I waited until the very last moment to be able to send an email like this, in some cases, that's all you have, in which case, this is correct. You should reach out at this time, right? But if it's not, if you have the time, you've got a couple of years left, don't be sitting around being like, oh, okay, well, I have years and years and years. You're supposed to be doing stuff in those years, you know what I'm saying? Right? So that's just something to take into consideration.
So please, please, please do not have any typos. Do not spell their name wrong. And do not write them a novel or memoir because no one's got time to read all that. So the next group is with admission.
I love it. She gives great advice on that.
You can send them an email saying, hey, do you have any open house events, any virtual events that I can attend to get more information regarding the program? And then go to all of them. Hopefully, if things are still virtual, that'll make it easier. You don't have to spend money. You won't have to take time off work. But go to all of them if you can. Not only will you learn more about the program, but it'll also show obviously that you're interested, and you'll have like a name and a face that's starting to become a bit familiar. And if you go to these events, prepare some questions ahead of time, and then if they open the floor to conversations or Q&A, speak up. You can also reach out to the program coordinator. You could get their email either on the webpage, the program webpage, or through admissions. This is if you have more questions beyond what you were able to find on the
Okay, guys, let me stop right there. So site visits are basically meaningless, right? Unless you use them as a chance to be able to use them as a spring point, right? To actually getting in touch with the target supervisor, right? So if it's just some, person there who is like the coordinator for the grad school, this for a clinical like PhD program, right? Because it says PhD applications in the heading, right? If it's something where, the target supervisor is going to be there and is going to actually say something, you want to make sure you make a great first impression, and I want you to write within easily the first 24 hours after the thing is done to be able to ask some follow-up questions and these things, and to be able to, express your interest and your gratitude for their time, right? If it's something where the person is not the graduate school supervisor, they're not even there, they're not involved, it's just, a general representative of the admissions committee, you don't get, there's no like tick mark like there was in undergrad for saying like you visited the campus or you talked to a program admissions director. This is not how PhD programs and grad psych work, right? It's logical that would be a thing. It's not a thing, right? So I don't want you to worry about if there's, oh, I missed the virtual attendance day. Don't worry about that, okay? Now, if your supervisor was there, then that's definitely a missed opportunity, right? So I totally agree with what she's saying on that.
On the webpage and through the virtual events. So you don't have to reach out to them. They're a resource to get more information if you need it. But also great to ask them if they're available to set up a meeting, just to talk about the program in general, any concerns you have, any questions, like that.
You could, right? Just know that it's not going to help you get in, right? But if you have questions, fair enough. Realistically, like, the big reason to be able to get in touch with folks is to be able to figure out the median and interquartile ranges of the GRE and the GPA, because those are the things that are going to be used to triage you to be able to get you in.
The last group that I think is really important, current grad students, I think, are the greatest resource to get information about the program, because one, sometimes the grad students are on the application committee, or they do have a say in when your application is being reviewed. So you never know. So be on your best behavior. And
Rarely, but it does happen.
second, they're not trying to sell you something. They're not trying to sell you the school. So they have no reason to not be really straightforward with you about their experience. And they're also in it. So when you meet with them, have your questions prepared ahead of time and try to make questions that are, come up with questions that are pretty specific, not just like, what do you think about the program? Think about, ask questions like, is, your advisor, are they really hands-on or hands-off? Are they accessible? How much research work do you do? Do you have any opportunities to do, X, Y, and Z? What's the funding situation like? Is it actually livable?
Okay, so while it's going on, so she's making a good point. There's a video on navigating academia, so on this channel, that's specifically about that topic, in terms of how to be able to, like, questions to ask graduate students. You should not ask them kind of whatever, like she says, targeted questions, but there is a very discrete set of questions not to ask them. Okay, so after watching this video, make sure you watch that one.
Business, maybe. Be super specific with your questions. Try not to ask super vague ones like, what do you think about the program? You can even Google questions to ask during PhD interview, and that'll give you, like, pretty good material to work with. And this is also a really great time to ask them if they know if the program has any cutoffs. Cutoffs could be for GREs or, anything else. Let's say the program has a stack of applicants and they have a GRE cutoff of X number. All of the applicants that are below that number will just get scrapped.
So that usually isn't at the level of the lab or the individual supervisor. I suppose maybe this professional has experience with a program that does do that, which is fair enough. But usually if you just kind of literally just inquire as to whoever the administrative assistant is for the program and ask them that question, that information should be there. And oftentimes that information can be really, like, it can basically be clearly discerned, right, by taking a look at the median and interquartile ranges of the last 2 or 3 cohorts of applicants.
Brutal. And then after that, they'll look at the remaining applicants. Educational background like GPA, GREs, research experience, clinical work, published, how many papers you published, how many conferences you attended.
She's great. Rock on, dude. You got it.
Volunteer work, letter of recommendation, like, all of these things are still super important. But if you feel maybe a bit like worried about a deficiency in your application, maybe you don't have many or any conferences, hope is not lost. There are a lot of people that didn't do any of these things and it still worked, but hopefully it can't hurt. And hopefully it'll get, maybe your face, your name recognized. You'll leave a good impression with some of the people that you're meeting with. And that way, by the time it gets to the application and they're sitting down and reading your application, maybe your name will stand out. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions, comments, critiques, feel free to comment below, or I also put the Instagram link for Chasing Clinical Psychology. You can just DM me. And good luck. Ciao, chicos.
Awesome, guys. That was a great video, okay? So, 3 secret must-dos for PhD applications. This is from Chasing Clinical Psychology. She currently has 568 subscribers. If you liked that content, subscribe to her channel, right? It's awesome. We always got to support each other here in the academia YouTube space. So that's my honest feedback on that video in particular. If you guys see other videos online that you're like, I wonder what Dr. Singh would think of this video, please do go ahead and you can either, shoot it to me in a direct message on Instagram. I'm at Dr., which is Dr. Phoenix Singh, or you can always leave it down in the comment section of this or any of my other videos. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next one. Bye-bye. Peace.